Okay, it looks like we are clock ticking. Let us get the light on the road and commence Evolution Hour for today, 4th of May. Ongoing uncertain times of doom and or not, as the case may be, as we scroll past the analog devices into tortuganwordpress.com, the charming little website that has a whole bunch of the old tip work. They're available for everyone to see. And I'm waiting for my image to come back up on screen. There we go. Well, I forgot to bring the books around, but it doesn't matter. You've seen that in previous episodes. The two Dwayne Gish books from 1978 and 1995, Evolution, the Fossils Say No, and Evolution, the Fossils Still Say No. Hi, Lisa. And this, of course, is another uneventful Luskin 800 plus list, except we need to burrow a little bit deeper into an issue that we had brought up in a couple years back or more that rears its ugly little head as to where ALU retrotransposons come from. So anyway, as you know, we're still in that first chapter of the Gish book and the counterpart, the revisions, to see what, if anything, gets changed. We're actually in a added some stuff in the 1995 version. But this main topic is that Gish is in the Glee Club mode. That's the phrase that I use to refer to the motif in creationism that was really popular in that old style creationism, and to some extent still pops up. There are posts on it in Answers in Genesis and ICR's Acts and Facts and that periodically. But anyway, the trope of the great creation scientists of the past who made science what it is today, and they'll drag out Newton and Kepler and blah, blah, blah. We'll have a whole section on that in Rocks Were There, Volume 2. And then, to some extent, bringing up ones of the present. David Capege has made a big, long list of things. There's been several instances of this. Well, the version in the 1978 Dwayne Gish will be a bunch of names that most of you heard of. Hello. I got another person there. Yes, there we go. Yeah, Vesta. One is biologist Frank Marsh, who lived from 1899 to 1992. He's the guy that was coming up with the baraminology idea back in the 1940s. And then there's geneticist Walter Lammerts, lived from 1904 to 1996. He doesn't pop up much at all in modern creationist lore. There's Thomas Barnes, physicist, 1911 to 2001. He's probably the most immediately recognizable for people slugging around in modern creationism, particularly in relation to cosmological themes, and he'll be popping up a lot in the cosmology chapter of Rocks Were There, Volume 2. Then there is a name that's crusty old style, in part because so few of his books and stuff are available. Swiss pharmacology professor A.E. Wilder Smith, lived from 1915 to 1995. Hard to find any of his stuff as physical books, nothing virtually online typically from him. He's played a much bigger role, and he gets authority quoted, of course, by Gish and company. Then Gish listed Henry Morris, engineer, 1918 to 2006, one of the great granddaddies of modern ICR creationism, fine and dandy. Morris's stuff is alluded to almost ghost-like. More recent later posts of Morris's stuff get recycled on a periodic basis in Acts and Facts. So you'll get stuff just a year or two ago, a piece that was written back, say, in 1995, cycled in 2005, and then again in 2015, blah, blah, blah. I actually purpose hyperevolution on steroids. Yeah, that one turns out to be a deliciously relevant trope for this episode, because we're taking a walk down memory lane, because it turns out that several of the people on this list that he gives are people who back in that period of the 1970s were basically saying no such thing as speciation at all. And that is not a trope you find in modern day creationism. You were still finding it as a ghost in the 1995 revision, but we'll be getting to them shortly. The last of the little miscellaneous names is another engineer, Melvin A. Cook. He is a Mormon. still knocking around as far as I can tell. He pops up in the helium diffusion from the Earth issue. And so Cook represents the little niche in Mormonism of young Earth creationists. The polling that I'd seen on this quite a few years ago indicated that the proportion of Mormons who are young Earth creationists is probably comparable to what you would get among Baptists or Catholics or others. So, maybe 30, 40% could vary. But you will fall into that camp. Anyway, then we get to some lesser knowns, and by lesser knowns, these are people I had never heard of. And it was only therefore for this video that we're looking into it. And fortunately, a little bit of jackpot. We live in the internet era, and stuff comes up where you can actually find out what's going on here. Had Rocky Mountain Atheist Conference, good number of great speakers. Oh, that's great. Yeah, these... I haven't been to an atheist convention in a very long time. I'd love to speak at one. I wonder why I haven't been. I think I make a damn good speaker at these things, but I have my invisibility field around me. What the hell can I say? At any rate, the first is someone who is described by Gish as world famous biologist, Canadian entomologist William R. Thompson, who I found had a Wikipedia page. Born in 1887, died in 1972. So technically speaking, he was already dead when Gish is waving him around. And later on, he acknowledges in the 95 book that he's gone by the wayside. At any rate, Thompson was apparently a very conservative Catholic. And he's one of those that rejected speciation. There's a 1937 book, and boy, that's putting you back into the pre-ICR period. 1937 book that he has. It's available for a read at archive.org, so I'll be putting a link up to that, where he alluded to a fixity in nature and goes on about that. That's around page 195, if you feel like diving into it. I got a bit of a croup in here. It's rather frustrating. So if my voice sounds a little bit grainy, there we go. It happens almost all the time when we get yo-yo temperatures going up and down. We had a kind of cool weather 3 or 4 days ago. We had the heater on. Now I have to have the air pump on because we're pushing into the 80s. So whoop, whoop, up and down, up and down. My metabolism always gets a little blue. Right. The other is somebody who is listed as the late Dutch zoologist J.J. Duveen de Wit, born 1909, died in 1885. He turns out to have very little you can read of his directly online. He certainly didn't like Teilhard de Chardin. He wrote a piece in 1964 complaining on that new pseudo-Christian evolutionary mysticism of Chardin. I'll be putting a link up to the JSTOR thing, which basically gives the first page of it. Unfortunately, I'm not able to find full text copy of the thing of like a religion journal, and it's not readily available. But we get more of the jackpot with the very verbose posts at the Creation Research Society Quarterly, a 3-parter, by the way, that's going into the great tradition of what DeWitt was talking about. So he is actually summarizing and discussing in lengthy detail of the content of DeWitt's oeuvre. So you'll be able to get all of those full text PDFs and follow along as need be. And Duveen de Wit is apparently somebody else who has problems with speciation. That gives you a sense of where creation is back in the 37, 47, 50, 67 period, when thinking about prior to the rise of modern contemporary American young Earth creationism that gets on the front burner, which starts really kicking in here in the 70s and 80s, as we can see in these books. That it's a lore that when they're thinking about kinds and species, their creationists are conflating the two. So that they're basically drawing the line, no speciation. Now, that was a ticking time bomb for young Earth creationism because of Creation Week and the Ark. And the Ark ain't big enough to hold all the species. This was a thing that was really Marsh and others were pretty much aware of during this period, but it was obviously not sinking in for Dwayne Gish, who is a biochemist. So this is not an area where he's bumping into it. And we still find this at the grassroots level among standard creationists that you're going to bump into online. The vast majority of them, when they are talking about macroevolution and how impossible it is, they are thinking you can't turn one species into another. So they are functionally stuck back in the same worldview that these 1960s, 70s, 50s, 40s level creationists were. As we know from the dialectic of arc only so big, can't fit millions of species on it, kinds have got to be bigger level for everybody but us. Pretty much at the pharmacology ended up. That's and that is a movement that's kicking into high gear only in the late 20th century, and most of the baraminology papers are in the 21st century. So this is the new brand of creationism that has left the no speciation back in the dust. But how many grassroots creationists are you going to be bumping into who are reading baraminology papers? Not a hell of a lot of them. So that's a really fun part in here. Now, next week, I'm going to be filling in the little bit of an interesting gap that takes place between the 1995 version and the 1978 version as to all of this little bit of the Glee Club, because in the 95 version, Gish inserts another section that actually refers to some science papers, and he's bringing in Michael Denton. There's a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't around in the 78 version. So I'll be devoting that discussion to that in great detail, because we still have some dangling loose ends for some names that Gish puts on his Glee Club in the 1995 version. Oh, yes. On SFT. Well, yes, that's a good question. Standing for truth, whether he's okay with the issue of speciation or not. It'd be fun to find out if he can think about it. I'm inclined to think that because he's parasitizing Jensen and Sanford and all the rest, that he's probably pretty much okay with hyperspeciation, even though they might not like to use the term. They would just be sloughing it off as variation within a kind, because hyperspeciation sounds a lot too evolutionary. And in fact, to some extent, you've got a little in-house argument going on between AIG and the rest, or even within AIG and outside of the rest of AIG, about to what extent is that modern new creationism movement that's willing to accept a lot of this stuff becoming too evolutionary for their own good. Haha, no problem for me. It's just the ironies of life. But unless they're planning on making the arc a hell of a lot bigger or have it dimensionally transcendental like the TARDIS, they ain't going to fit millions of species in there. So that 1500 kind level that you get with the family level is at least theoretically workable. It's problematic in a lot of other ways, but at least it doesn't crash and burn as it would trying to cram too many species in there. Even Woodmarap stuff back in the 1990s, that Noah's Ark feasibility study, was talking in the order of like 20,000 species or more. And that's frankly too big to fit in the Ark, as we now know from that. And we'll be going in a lot of this fun information in Rocks Were There Volume 2 when we have the master listing of the Ark Encounter kinds at Ark Encounter. So 2 Russians get added to the list on the Gish 1995 version of this Glee Club. And its first one is the, quote, promising young scientist in the Soviet Union, unquote, which was ironic because by 1995, the Soviet Union didn't exist anymore. It was gone in 1991. So the nomenclature was becoming kind of obsolete, and Gish was kind of slow on the uptake here. Anyway, one is biochemist, listed as a biochemist. He was actually a toxicologist, Dmitri Kouznetsov, and then geneticist Leonid Korochkin, 1935 to 2006. Korochkin was fun to find some stuff on because there ain't a hell of a lot to find on him. And I can find no corroboration that he was a creationist. The fact that Gish is listing him as one may mean he had a closet creationist side, but he was a accomplished artist, well-renowned. There's an obituary on him that I don't, unfortunately, have an ability to give a full link to, from a Russian technical journal that has nothing but praise and about his technical expertise in that. Not a whiff of indication that he's got like a religious axe to grind, let alone a creationist one. So maybe he was a young earth creationist, because the creationist moniker tends to get restricted very specifically to within the young age fold. All the microbes surviving the flood. Oh dear, they are not going to think about that. Bacteria and marine life for all practical purposes, and insects for all practical purposes, and plant life for all practical purposes just don't get discussed in the flood geology, big slosh lexicon, because spoiler alert, they're going to be a mess trying to figure out how many kinds there are and how these could be dealt with, and then how do you get them distributed to where they're. How do you get maize into the New World from Ararat if the piece of corn, the only one surviving, was on the ark? And what kind of corn was it? Because there's a whole bunch of little things down there, of which the domesticated corn on the cob that we buy in the grocery store is a product of human development since corn was developed, and it goes back 9,000 years or whatever in the Americas, and the chronology just is a mess for them to try to figure out. But don't hold your breath that they're ever going to be working on that little puppy. So Kouznetsov is the fun one. And in fact, we're going to be having a section on Kouznetsov in this Glee Club issue in Rocks Were There Volume 2, because this guy is a screwball and a half. Martin Rudquist described him in 2007 as a, quote, Russian Baptist fraudster, unquote, whose several eventually retracted papers drew on imaginary data and non-existent sources. I mean, this is just full bore, crazy stuff. And it's stuff where he was arrested in 1998 for passing bad checks. He was acting like a guy in as a supposed FBI informant. I mean, he is just, you can tick this off as somebody who is really not very likable. And in the same year that Gish's 1995 book came out and had him included, there was already rumbling going on in the creationism movement at CMI that was looking very doubtfully on who's a legitimate guy on their side. So that's an interesting bit, another little fossil item from the past. So what we got then, we'll move on to our part 2. Before I go into part 2, let me make sure we've got our thank you note for our people that are still holding on in the exciting world of tip patrons. And I'm well aware of the fact how things are getting tighter and tighter and tighter for everybody. And I think they're going to get a lot tighter before they get looser. So I am very, very thankful, grateful for everybody who has been able to stick it out all this time and keep everybody's powder dry. Thank you, everybody, colleagues, researchers, assistant researchers, friends, legacy patrons, and all the rest. And hanging in there, kids, hanging in there. We are doing the best we can under the circumstances. We will see where things go and what kind of royalties come along when the second volume of Rocks come out, which we should be able to get out this year. We are proceeding apace. The font size for the index and the bibliography may be very tiny, though. People worried a little bit about how tight the font size was on the hundreds plus page references in Volume 1. Well, it's heavier references in Volume 2 because there's been so much more research. In fact, good Lord, there's a new paper, brand new paper out on the Younger Dryas that we have to put in the material. There's stuff on the discovery of how magnetic fields play a part in solar system formation that's getting folded into the cosmology chapter. You know, we're keeping things right up to speed on stuff. And Cambrian explosion, Ediacaran biota papers on complex organisms, brand new paper on that. We've included that in the work. So we'll be very much up to speed. I don't know how they're handling it. Well, he's dying, so yes, there we go. Anyway, part 2. 3 more papers on the list from 2015. The very fact that they're so old suggests that they're trawling through their old bibliography list, and we're expecting to be doing that for quite some time. There's one by Tohonen from Nature. That'll be put the full text on. There's Zhang. Unfortunately, I can only do an extended abstract on that little puppy, but Science Direct has an awful lot of information in there, so that should give you the idea of it. And our zinger, Daniel et al., which has some really useful explanations. On the surface level, what they're doing is trying to figure out what's going on with the connections that ALUs are making in terms of regulatory systems and developmental biology and embryology, all these kinds of things that the more recent papers that we've been dealing with have continued on with. Nothing in any of these papers, of course, mention that most of the million plus ALUs, let alone retrotransposons in general, are functional. So none of it changes the judgment that we've been seeing in all this series all along. But it brings up a topic that I had bumped into a ways back that now get really caught home because of how it's described in Daniel, the Daniel paper. First off, the paper explicitly says the human genome is under constant invasion by retrotransposable elements, unquote. And ALU is a prime example. And they go on that quote. They likely originated from the 7SL RNA gene, which encodes the non-coding RNA of the signal recognition particle, SRP, unquote. And they cite 2 papers on that, which, by the way, are not on the Luskin list. There's a 2007 paper by Kriegs, which we noted previously. We'd hit on it, and noting that it wasn't in the Luskin list, that way back in Evolution Hour 331 on 8th of July, 2024. And then this other paper from 1984, Ulu and Shudi, that I'll be putting the full link up so that you can follow that one. So the 84 paper was obviously very early in the identification of this stuff. But Daniel pulls the issue right up into focus in the way that he's describing this, because I hadn't yet encountered so blatant and simple an explanation, which turned out when I did some background research on it, checking out what Wikipedia had to pay on it, it's all completely accurate. I had just not paid that much attention to it the first time I encountered this paper. And so Daniel went on, quote, a retrotransposon was plausibly formed from a partially deleted version of the F7SL RNA gene sometime before the divergence of primates and rodents. This precursor evolved into B1 repeats in rodents and into the FLAM, free left ALU monomer, and FRAM, free right ALU monomer elements in the primate lineage. Eventually, the FLAM and FRAM sequences were fused and able to amplify efficiently into what we today call an ALU element, unquote. I think I probably presented the earlier discussions of this issue in a more coherent manner than I did, had I had that tight of a summary available to me at the point. So I have to wonder what the hell is going through Luskin or whichever one of the other little gangs, McClatchy or whoever, was supplying this particular item that went on the list in bringing this thing up, because it's so useful in its explanatory elements and the sources citing, and yet none of this is apparently percolated upstream into how intelligent designers discuss this topic. Because you got to deal with the idea that either ALUs are magically put in there and just look like these pieces of other stuff, or they're magically inserted by God twipping around with this particular gene. And did this happen just once? Did it happen independently, magically in mice and then in primates? But if it's in primates, how did we get it? Would it have to be done again because we're not related to primates? Because that's one of the dogmas designers stick onto, although Michael B. He can be a little bit whiffly on this. What is it? Gosh, it would be nice if they would ever think about the things they don't think about, but unfortunately, they do not think about the things they do not think about. So these will be a very, very nice little sets of papers to add into the mix. We're now like 180 papers into their monster list. It'll be really fun to see how many other connections are popping up with material, especially as we trawl farther and farther back into time, because sometimes some of these little sidebar issues, like that origin of the ALU retrotransposon, to some extent isn't being discussed in the most recent papers because they just moved on, because they understand the origins. They don't need to repeat it every single time they're alluding to it in a paper. They're now just dealing with the repercussions of it. So there's a backstabbing aspect to creationists delving too far back into that superstructure because it just brings up the very thing that they shouldn't be bringing up. There we go. I think that's going to be a very, very fun type on this stuff. So anyway, next week we'll be filling in that little slot in Gish. We've got a bunch of interesting new wrinkles that have been popping along. I discovered a brand new creationist that I hadn't heard of before. He's been busy for quite a few years, but always somewhere else, and I hadn't been bumped into him. But kicked onto the field because Dan Stern Cardinale was having a discussion with another critic of creationism They were discussing this Adventist video series where this guy who was an Adventist pops up as one of the speakers. And so I go, oh, I haven't heard of you before, blah, blah, blah. And that means we'll be putting in some information into that. And I'll be getting to that probably. It's in the queue. It's probably about a month or so down the line before we get to all of that. But it will be revealing some things about Adventist approach to education, the extent to which they're obsessing about origins or busts and all of that stuff. It's going to be rather fun. And then the other issue is keeping an eye out for the ongoing matter of the absence of creationist efforts at the legislative level all during 2.0. This is like the dog that hasn't barked yet, but it just intrigues me, given how much evangelicals despise evolution, that in the first term and in the second term, there's been no concerted effort that I've been able to see, even though Project 2025, and that is enabling all of these other things about immigration policy and anti-abortion activities, but anything in relation to this creationism education issue in the age of the earth and the like, that has been an obsession of both the young earth creationists and the intelligent design movement for decades. Not any inkling whatsoever that there's any push or help from the top federal level. And that intrigues me. Is it simply because, one, Trump is an ignoramus and a scientific illiterate, and he don't give a rat's ass about any of that stuff. He's willing to pander to them on the abortion issue because he can't avoid it. But in this other area, he doesn't really care. And to what extent are the various theocrats and the like that they've been put in charge of all of these various efforts to enable Project 2025? And that is that this is not their front burner issue, that they're really not terribly concerned about getting evolution out of the schools. They have much bigger fish to fry on suppressing voter things and getting rid of trans rights and a whole bunch of other obsessions. In fact, we do know that one of the co-authors of that Privileged Planet book is knee-deep in the Heritage Foundation efforts to restrict trans rights, and he's very, very proud about it. So that's kind of an indication of what gets on the front burner and what not. So it may be one of the weird ironies that having this enabler Trump 2.0 may end up still having absolutely no help whatsoever for furthering the creationist agenda in the education department. We'll see. But everybody keep an eye out for that element. Let my little advert up here for Rocks Were There of Volume 1. Waiting for the little slow. There you go. And then share away. I must say I will be enjoying the fairly warm weather, that it's easier to some extent on my electric bill than the amount of electricity I needed to use to supplement the oil furnace, because the price of oil has made it difficult to restock that. But now we're in the summertime, spring and summer. Hopefully we won't have to worry about climbing the wall of refilling the oil tank until well later in the autumn. We will see what happens. And that little duty out of the way. So we will be continuing to proceed apace. A lot of the red states have put off primaries. Oh, yes, there's a particular effort now that this yet another idiotic ruling from our Coulter Camp Supreme Court to gut the voting rights issues. To what extent that in the end has all that good of an effect, it will probably still suppress the presence of Black legislators in the House and Senate. But that doesn't mean it's going to be helping the Republicans any, because it may be the case that there increases the probability of a Democrat getting elected who happens to be not Black, or to some extent still Black, as the case may be, as we get more shit hitting fan, as the economy slams into all of these things. You see, Trump never learned his lesson, and 7 million Trump voters never learned of what his misbehavior on COVID was telling us about how he approaches problems and resolutions of them. When COVID came along, this was a perfectly natural mess that required scientific literacy and a quick response. And his initial reaction was to try to bluff it away and say, no, poo-poo, we got it all covered, when he didn't. And that meant you reached the threshold where the virus was spreading like gangbusters, and the economy grinds to a halt in order to be able to slow it down. He then does desperate moves, Operation Warp Speed, get vaccines out super duper fast, hurry, never mind what the anti-vaxxers say, and slam it, check to everybody, try to keep everybody afloat instead of trying to respond earlier and prevent layoffs to begin with. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that might have been done faster had Trump not been slow on the uptake on that. As it is, analyses have shown, and one of the day when Jackson and I have the chapter on anti-vaxxer stuff in a future book, we'll be able to be pointing out the source citations relating to that anywhere from 3, 4, 5, 600,000 Americans died needlessly because of the stupidity of the Trump administration. Well, Trump 2.0 don't have a pandemic where a virus doesn't give a rat's ass about your politics or your religion. It just knows it's infection vector. Instead, Trump is going gangbusters, creating artificial problems. His stupid tariffs that are in economy slowers and inflationary, and then his needless war with Iran that is inflationary, as everybody knows from their gas pumps. Trump blustering on, oh no, we're almost there to a deal. The war that was over to begin with, we're still working to see if it can be over. And the Iranians, who have decided to close the Strait of Hormuz, which every idiot ought to have known, every previous administration avoided going to war with Iran precisely because they knew they could do that. Mr. Trump is going to reopen the strait by closing it via a blockade. Aren't you just doing Iran's work for you? So now American taxpayers funneling the money to blockade the strait, to keep the strait closed in order to open it, to resolve the problem that Trump started that he can't get out of now because, what is he going to do? And he may float all over the place in desperation. Any reasonable person in the military has been pretty much bunked out by screwball Hegseth. I hope people have been catching his insanely arrogant, testy, evasive testimony before the Senate and House. That I think it was a House of Representatives, I think. At any rate, Iran, when it comes to that stupid war, yes, the Secretary of War on the war we're not doing because it's just an excursion. Yes, like taking a tugboat down the Mississippi. Yeah, it's just an excursion at $1 billion a day. Even if they could pull the rabbit out of the hat and resolve the problem tomorrow, there's still weeks and months of feedback that go through all of these supply chain messes in exactly the way it did during the COVID pandemic. And so Trump is just doing things that are exacerbating everything. And the other matter, the tariffs, he will never give up on the damn things. He's still using them as bludgeons, right and left, putting things on electric cars from Britain and all that. Ain't going to be good, kids, because they're a bad idea to begin with, but don't blame me. I voted for Harris. So anyway, yes, the end of something live in there. So it's going to be an interesting little process as we work through the rest of this chapter and encounter the little bits and pieces. For all practical purposes, I'm assuming that anything that Gish adds for the 1995 version is material after 1978. And it'll be intriguing to see exceptions to that. And I'm thinking in relation to some of the dinosaur material, some of this stuff is in fact not in that realm. Because I remember back in the day when I was doing the early stages of the KIP project, the thing that bothered me about launching into an attack on Duane Gish was not because I didn't like his arguments, but because so much of the evolution of the fossils say no was vague and generic and superficial, and I didn't have access to the technical material that he was citing, and very little on dinosaurs. So he has, even though he's got a whole section talking about dinosaurs in the 95 book, there's only a smattering of technical literature, which fortunately I was able to find chunks of that. So the old tip material was dealing with how he was misrepresenting the protoceratopsids and all that kind of stuff. And we'll be getting to that in due course. But if he is playing catch up in research and therefore trawling older material that isn't in the 78 version, that's an instantaneous measure of stuff that he is only getting around to late in the game. And we will have the advantage that the vast majority of this material is going to be accessible in a way that wouldn't have been the case if I had tried to go after the 95 book back in the 20th century, because so many of the internet material that I've been linking to here didn't even exist. So this, from a scholarly point of view, is just a golden opportunity. We're in much better case for all of this stuff to be able to analyze this material. And I'm hoping, in my clumsy numbskull way, went to a Christian school that taught dinos were a trick of Satan. Yeah, that is an indication of how extreme that school was, because that would not be the position. The mainstream creationists at ICR, AIG, Creation Research Society, any of those were never claiming that dinosaurs were fictional fakery. Now, some of that may have been filtering through the kind of stuff that you might have gotten in an Adventist school, because they often had a lot more extreme positions. They have a curious roller coaster of activity. There's still a great deal of Adventists. The Loma Linda University still is functionally a young earth creationist position, but they've also kind of tempered their public bit so they can actually do not too bad paleontology and geology work that can get published in regular journals. We've alluded to some of these things before on these whales, and it's going to be showing up in the citation field in the whale section in Rocks Were There Volume 2. So any of these religious denominations often have extreme range, but the dinosaurs as fake or dinosaurs as a trick of Satan is a really niche, extreme position that the preacher may be dealing with it, and it's extremely likely that they are not grounding this on any of the major creationist journals, that they're coming up to this on their own and maybe trolling little bits and pieces here and there. It'd be absolutely fascinating. I've never seen anybody that's done a study or a description of their detailed experience on that. So by all means, Lisa, check out, get in contact with Dapper Dino, or one of the other various people, Vice Rhino, or Dancer and Cardinale, or Apologia. Any of these people, I think, would be just delighted to have you on to have a chat about it, because all of this is in your direct experience, not in mine. I went to public school, so I don't have any experience of that at all. And you get people who are reacting to people who have been to Bob Jones University background, or Becca, my friend Peter, his background in his creationist church background was running off the Abeka books that I mentioned last time about the Dr. Banjo moment that I was seeing from their version of the authority quoting material. And get this stuff documented and explained, to see that, because that, to see if you can remember, for example, any of the textbooks that may have been dealt with, or if they made use of videos or mimeograph material, or what kinds of stuff they operated from. That's really an important niche in documentation for historical purposes. And so I urge you, to contact. I know Dapper Dino hasn't done too many series on this recently, but a few years ago, he did a major bunch with lots of different people who came from a young earth creationist background, as Dapper Dino did, to explain their backgrounds. And that way you can find out. I've found it terribly educational to find out which books they were drawing on. Were they drawing on Kent Hovind material? Was it stuff from Henry Morris? And so you find out which little niche areas are the kind of squeaky wheel material in that background stuff. And a lot of this is not percolating into the regular scholarly literature where you get surveys and treatments of books from an outsider's point of view, but there's nothing as useful as personal experience from the insider's point of view. So there we go. It's on there. So we got our commercial in play. We're at 40 minutes, so that's most of an hour. I think that's wonderful. Everybody stay down and hunkered. Watch out for finances. Be mindful of the fact that I don't think we're anywhere near out of the woods yet. It's been a sign of the resiliency of the economy that we haven't hit a crash yet. And maybe the economy is so resilient that we're crash proof, that we can't have a stock market crash and a depression trigger in the way we used to back in the Great Depression or 4 times during the 19th century. But if you have enough dumbheaded stress, and Donald Trump just seems hell-bent to knock the props out from under things, I'm not confident and I'm not optimistic in that respect. The economy is big enough, though, that we will be performing an experiment, if that happens, to see what's the dynamic difference between how blue states and red states weather the storm, and whether or not the red states get hoist on their own petard and they find that, boy, this gutting of safety net policies was a really bad idea. And you learn from experience, kids. So everybody stay super duper safe. Watch out for the wooden penguins, especially ones wielding laser weapons. And we will be seeing you next week with more of the exciting world of what Dwayne Gish thought to put in his 1995 book. See you next week.